Got your Bibles with you this evening. Open up to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, that is where we're going to start our study. It's where we'll spend the first few minutes. So if you've got your New Testaments with you, be opening up there to Luke chapter 15, and we'll get started in just a few moments. I'm going to double check with Jimmy right now and make sure we're all good on audio so that I don't make another terrible mistake like I did this morning. Thank you for being here. We have visitors in our audience. We are thankful that you're here. And if you've got any questions about anything you hear, anything that we do here in our assembly together this evening, feel free to ask after services. We'd love to talk with you about who we are here at University Oaks, what we stand for, and what we practice. But thank you so much for being here. We want to talk this evening about friendship and what the Bible has to say about friendship. And I understand completely that oftentimes when we say we're going to talk about friendship as parents, we kind of nudge our kids and he's talking to you, pay attention, right? And while certainly our young people, classify whomever you will in that category, need lessons like this, those of us who may not be young people but still need friends need lessons like these as well. And so let's make sure that we're trying to make the application not only for our young people, but also making these applications for ourselves as well. We want to look at this study of the topic of friendship by considering at the beginning two stories that Jesus presents to us in the New Testament. The first here, a parable in Luke chapter 15. Of course, you know from your Bible studies, we have three parables here in Luke chapter 15. We have the parable of the lost sheep, we have the parable of the lost coin, and then we end with the parable of the lost boy. And we want to talk about this prodigal son here for just a few moments. But I want you to think about this parable of the prodigal son in a context of friendship, which is not the common context with which we read this. It is not the primary context of this parable. The primary context of this parable is about God's love for the lost, and identifying to Jesus here as who the lost were and surprising some of them at who the lost person really was. That's the primary context. But I would submit to you there is a secondary lesson we see here in this parable about friendship. You've got this young man who comes to his father in verse 12 and says, "Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me." And reading in our 21st century English, we do not get the significance of that statement whatsoever. Some of you know the name Chuck Durham. Chuck Durham has a wonderful sermon that he preaches from Luke 15. Mitch, you've heard this sermon before because we've talked about it. And apparently Chuck has been preaching it for a long time. But when it's a good sermon like that, I guess you preach it a long time. It's an excellent sermon. One of the sermons Chuck makes, and he draws from some Jewish sources here, is when this young son comes to the father in verse 12 and says, "Give me the portion of my inheritance that is due me." This is a son coming to his father and saying to the father, "You are better for me if you were dead. Dad, I would be better off if you were no longer living. Give me what is mine. I'm gone." And the father gives the son what he asks for. And in verse 13 we read, "Not many days later the young son gathered everything together, and he went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living." He takes what he has, and we would say he blows it, doesn't he? We get a little bit of insight perhaps in everything that goes on when you jump over to chapter 15 and you look over here at the conversation that the older son has with the father. And in verse 30 he says, "But when this son of yours comes home, who devoured your wealth with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him." He didn't just waste his money, he wasted his money. A lifestyle that even many in the world would look at and say, that's just base. That's ungodly. That's what this younger son did. In verse 14, he spends everything. And there arises a severe famine in that country, and he began to be in need, verse 14 says. In verse 15, he went and he attached himself, he sold himself off to one of the citizens of that country, and that citizen sent him into the fields to feed his swine, and he was longing to fill his stomach with the, Ben, when he was reading this, the caropods. He would have gladly filled his belly with those caropods that the swine were eating, but no one gave him anything to eat. He finds himself with no food, with no companions, and with no hope. Now, you want to talk about a lesson about friendship, you're getting into one here. Here's a guy who has all the money, and for a while he's got a lot of companions, doesn't he? He's got, verse 30, those harlots who are all around him. But the moment the money is gone, what happens? There's nobody. He's alone. Have you ever seen what swine eat before? I think I've told you the story of our visit to the Subiaco Monastery in North Arkansas when I was in elementary school. And there's not a lot that sticks with me from the field trips that we took in Arkansas. By the way, one of our field trips was to the fish hatchery. That's what they teach you in Arkansas, going to the fish hatchery. I remember the smell from there. But when we went to the Subiaco Monastery, they had those pigs that they raised partially for food, partially to take care of the garbage. And you look at what those swine would eat. And it was just everything that you dumped out off of your tray into a bucket and you slopped them with. Right? Can you imagine being so hungry you would dip the ladle into that bucket and gladly take a sip of it? I haven't known that kind of hunger, and I'm thankful. This young man did. What a change, right? To go from the high life, surrounded by people, to being alone, to being sold out, to being willing to eat the hog slop. Put a pin in that. We're coming right back to it. Go a page over in your Bible. Look at Luke chapter 16. There's another story that Jesus tells here. Another story that Jesus recounts for us. It's the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Again, another story of Jesus we probably don't think of in terms of friendship, but I want you to consider a little bit of this with me. The story itself is going to begin here in verse 19, but there is a necessary context going back to verse 14. Look at Luke chapter 16 and verse 14. Lucas capítulo 16, verso 14. This is a parable that is spoken to the Pharisees. All right, whatever conclusions we come to about the story that Jesus tells here, it begins in verse 14. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and they were scoffing at Jesus. And so from a basis of a discussion about money, Jesus is going to talk to the Pharisees, and in his teaching to the Pharisees, he is going to tell this story about the rich man and Lazarus. There was a rich man, verse 19, who was habitually dressed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. If you fare sumptuously every day, F-A-R-E, fare sumptuously, it means you're eating good. And he was eating good every day. And while we might have our notions of what eating good might look like, one of the hallmarks of eating good in this first century culture is that there was a table that other people were at besides just you, right? You prepared a meal, you didn't prepare a meal, you had a meal prepared. This guy did, right? He's not having to prepare his own meal, someone's preparing it for him. And he's setting the table and others are coming in. That's what the Pharisees did, right? Because they're going to belittle Jesus and mock Jesus when he has these meals, but he's sitting at table with whom? The tax collectors and the sinners and the prostitutes, right? Okay, those aren't the people that the Pharisees would sit at table with, but they would sit at table with people. They would sit at table with their friends, right? That's why one reason Jesus in the Gospels is going to encourage us that when we throw a banquet, unlike the Pharisees, we're not supposed to invite whom? Don't invite your friends, Jesus will say. Invite the other people who can't pay it back. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But here is this message to the Pharisees. He is talking to them about their wealth. Here is the rich man who was faring sumptuously every day. He was eating, he was surrounded by people, is what I want you to take away here. He was surrounded by people, day in and day out. Perhaps even somebody had their chair at his house. You ever have a visitor come to your house that has their chair? This is where they sit. When they come, this is where they're plopping down, and nobody better get in it. He would have had some of those guys in his house. But his story, for all practical purposes, ends in verse 23 when we read this. The rich man died and was buried. Verso 23, verse 23, and in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and he saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. Goes from being surrounded, from having the best in life, to what? He is dead. He is in torment. And as the rest of the story will tell us, he is absolutely and utterly hopeless. Now, two stories. Not a whole lot about friendship there, right? At least on the surface detailing of things. But I want you to notice in both of these stories where things broke down. Answer me this. Where were the prodigal's friends when the money ran out? Number one might genuinely ask the question whether or not he actually had friends. But where is everybody else when the money ran out? He was surrounded by people, he was engaging with people, he was spending time with people until the money ran out, and then his only companions when the money ran out was the man to whom he hired himself out and the pigs. Where were his friends? When the money ran out, they weren't there, which tells you something about his friends, doesn't it? Or think about the rich man. Where were the rich man's friends when he saw Lazarus daily? And you might, what? Seeing Lazarus daily? Go back to chapter 16. Go back to chapter 16, verse 19. There was a certain man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, fared sumptuously every day. And in verse 20, a certain poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered in sores. Whenever a rich man left his house to go about his daily business, maybe he needed to go down to the temple. Maybe he had business to conduct. Maybe he had to travel to someone else's house to sit down at their table and enjoy a meal at their house and his seat in their house. But whenever the rich man walked out of his house and walked out of his gate and got onto the thoroughfares in the city, who would he always see? There's Lazarus. And what did he do for Lazarus? Nothing. He, the rich man, fared sumptuously every day. What does the text tell us about Lazarus? Much like our prodigal son, when he hits rock bottom, he would have gladly been fed with the crumbs that were falling from the rich man's table. Instead, his only companions were the dogs, highly regarded in our culture, not so much in Jewish culture in the first century. So in and out he goes, and in and out, day by day, he ignores Lazarus. You know, you and I probably have people in our lives that if we were so blinded to something, they would say, you know what, Tyler, you have missed this. Or more to the point, you have missed him. Here's this guy that's in front of you every day and you've done nothing for him. Why don't we invite him for a change? Nobody said anything like that to the rich man, did they? We have no indication his friends ever said anything to him about Lazarus. Every indication is they were completely self-satisfied in their lives. And where did it end for the rich man? Lost. Dead, lost, tormented, and hopeless. Yes, because of his own choices. But where were his friends? Who was there to say something to him? Two stories here in the New Testament that end like they do in part because these people didn't have good friends. What is a good friend? Let's let Jesus tell us about friendship. What would Jesus tell us about friendship? We're going to go through some of our Gospels right now. Start in Matthew chapter 11. We're going to go through some of our Gospel accounts. Mateo capítulo 11. Matthew chapter 11, verse 19, verso 19. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 19. Jesus, in talking about his relationship with John the Baptist, verse 18, verso 18, for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax gatherers and sinners, yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Only thing we're pulling out of this passage this evening is verse 19, what it says about friends. What does verse 19 say about friends? They were accusing Jesus of being a friend of the tax gatherers and sinners. Why did they call Jesus a friend of the tax gatherers and sinners? You've read your Bible. You know why, don't you? Because Jesus spent time with them. Whatever conclusion we walk away with about friendship at the end of the day from Jesus, one thing Jesus is going to tell us about friendship is friendship involves spending purposeful time together. Not just we randomly happenstance end up at the same place at the same time. Jesus made it a point to go to those who were lost, didn't he? And commune with them, and talk with them, and eat with them, converse with them. Why? Not because he was fascinated with the lifestyle, not because he wanted a taste of their life while remaining what he was. He went and engaged with those people. Why? He cared about them. He cared about them. And when we care about people, what do? We spend time together, purposeful time together. Look at Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, Lucas capítulo 7, verso 6. Luke chapter 7 and verse 6. What else would Jesus tell us about friendship? Luke chapter 7 and verse 6. Now Jesus started on his way with them. This is about the centurion who had a slave who was about to die. Jesus is on his way, and the centurion is going to send word to Jesus, I don't need you to come to my house to heal him. I just need you to speak a word, and I have faith enough in you that the word that you speak will heal my servant. Now, the story plays out in verse 6 like this. Jesus started on his way to the house with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not fit for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. What do we learn about friends here? Friends help us draw closer to the Lord. Who carried the centurion's message to Jesus? It's no mistake that Jesus would tell us his friends did that. This is what friends do. Friends help draw us closer to the Lord. This is what Jesus would tell us about our friends. Stay there in Luke 11, or look at Luke chapter 11, Luke chapter 11. Capítulo 11, verso 5. Luke chapter 11, starting in verse 5. And here Jesus tells a parable. He tells a parable about prayer. He said to them in verse 5, suppose one of you shall have a friend, and shall go to him at midnight and say, friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine has come to me from a journey, and I have nothing to set before him. And from inside he shall answer and say, do not bother me, the door has already been shut, and my children and I are in bed, and I cannot give up and give you anything. Verse 8, no, but I tell you, even though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. And so I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. What do we learn about friends here? What does Jesus kind of covertly tell us about friends here? Friendship involves a willingness to sacrifice, doesn't it? A willingness to sacrifice and a willingness to help. We read this story here, and perhaps we walk away with a few different ideas. Number one, we might walk away saying, wow, I hope my friends wouldn't leave me banging on the door, having to ask repeatedly time and time again for help. Hopefully they would just answer the first time and realize I needed the help and give it to me. Or maybe we walk away with this impression depending on our experiences. Why was this guy knocking on the door? Did you catch that in verse 6? I'm going to friend A because friend B has come to my house and I've got nothing to give him. Can you lend me 3 loaves so I can feed friend B? Spoken to friend A. Depending on our experiences, if we're friend A, we might be saying what? Older brother syndrome from Luke 15. You never killed the fatted calf for me. You never brought the loaves to me. You've never set a dinner before me. What do we learn here? I mean, the lesson about friendship here is clear, isn't it? What do friends do? They help. They help even in inconvenient times. Who likes to be woken up at midnight when you have children? Because ideally, what are the children doing at midnight? They are sleeping. And what's the last thing you want to do to a sleeping child? Wake them up. Because why? Because everyone else in the house is awakened then, right? And it takes a long time to get them back down. We get that. But yet, what does the friend do? Helps willingly, eagerly. Why? For no greater reason than we're what? We're friends. A willingness to sacrifice and a willingness to help. A few pages later, chapter 14, capítulo 14, verso 12. Luke chapter 14 and verse 12. We said we were coming back to this in just a moment, the story that Jesus tells about throwing a dinner and who to invite. Jesus also went on to say to one who invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and repayment come to you. But when you give a reception, invite the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind, for you will be blessed since they do not have the means to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Let's understand what Jesus is saying here. Number one, Jesus is not telling us, don't invite your friends over. How do we know that? We can go to Romans chapter 12, we can go to 1 Peter, and we can look at passages that commend hospitality and rejoicing with each other and weeping with each other, Acts chapter 2, and eating with each other, all in the context of brethren. So Jesus is not condemning the idea of us getting together as friends. If he's not condemning that, then what is Jesus saying? He is saying, don't only extend your courtesy to those who love you, right? Extend your courtesy even to those who don't have the ability to extend it back to you. That's the message. Because in doing so, when we extend courtesy and mercy and grace to those who are unable to repay it to us, who are we like when we do that? We're like God, aren't we? That's called being godly. So what then does this passage here in Luke 14, what does it tell us about friendship? Friendship involves reciprocity. Right, we talked about that a little bit this morning, right? Reciprocalness, reciprocity. It's the assumption that's present at the end of verse 12. When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return. What happens when you invite your friends? Eventually, what do your friends get back around to doing? inviting you. Jesus is just working from this common understanding that when you have friends and invite them over, it's not that you're sitting there waiting and watching your phone and tapping your foot impatiently for the return invite to come, but it's understood that as friends, you spend time with each other, and I make an effort, and then you make an effort, right? Jesus would talk to us about friendship and talk to us about reciprocity in friendship. I make an effort. You make an effort. Then look at chapter 15, right where we began, but this time at verse 6. Capítulo 15, verso 6. Verso 6 y 9. Chapter 15 and verse 6. Here's the man who comes home and calls together his friends and his neighbors and says to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." The same way the woman who lost her coin, when she finds it in verse 9, calls together her friends and her neighbors and says, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my coin which was lost." What do friends do? Don't miss this. What friends do, they are ready to rejoice. Friends are the people that we can go to in our highs and in our lows, but here Jesus is focusing on our highs and can say, these are my people. This is who I go to. Because they care about me, they understand me, they seek my best interest. We rejoice together, that's what friends do. Look at John chapter 15. Look at John chapter 15. Let me tell you one other thing about friendship that Jesus would tell us. Friendship involves clear and honest communication. You cannot have a good friendship if you do not have communication. And that communication needs to be clear and it needs to be honest. See if you would agree with me if I make this statement. Sometimes what harms us in our friendships, and sometimes what might hinder us from making friends, is we expect people to read our minds, to know what we're thinking without us saying that. Once in a blue moon that happens, doesn't it? Perhaps you've got a friend, it's usually not more than one or two, but perhaps you have that friend who can read you like a book, who knows what you're saying, before you even say it. You finish each other's sandwiches, right? Clear and honest communication. Jesus, John chapter 15 and verse 15, Juan capítulo 15, verso 15. "No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you" what? Friends. "I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you." What does friendship involve? Communication. Not just, I need you to read my mind. It is clear, it is open, it is honest communication. All that I have to tell you, I tell you, and it's on the table, and you can understand it. Clear, honest communication. That's what Jesus would tell us about friendship. So take these, a few of these. Let's translate this over. The book of Proverbs tells us a man who has friends must himself be friendly. You want to have friends, be a friend yourself. How can I be a good friend? A few points here and we're done. Start at James chapter 1 with me. Start in James chapter 1. This is the one in Spanish that it took me a while. James is not Jaimes. And Brother Maldonado's back there laughing at me. James in Spanish is Santiago. Santiago, I don't understand Lilith. I don't get it. Santiago capítulo 1 verso 19. James chapter 1 and verse 19. What would James tell us but how we can be good friends. This you know, my beloved brethren, but let every one of you be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. You want to be a good friend? Do you want to have more friends? Learn how to listen. Everybody knows that person who is more interested in talking than they are in listening. How does that relationship work out? Not the greatest, right? Occasionally you get the one person who really likes to talk and the other person who really likes to listen, and bang, they hit it off and off they go. 9 times out of 10, that's not how it goes, though. How can I be a good friend? By being a good listener. I don't think there's arithmetic here to grasp, but if there is arithmetic to grasp, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Double the listening, right? Be a good listener. Quick to hear, slow to speak, because when we're quick to hear and slow to speak, that often makes us slow to what? Slow to anger, slow to misunderstandings. You want to be a good friend, be a good listener. Even when that might challenge what my thoughts are, even when that challenge might challenge what my previous experiences are, listen, hear. Consider the possibility that I might be wrong, that I might have misread things. Look at Matthew chapter 11. Go back to where we were here. Mateo capítulo 11, Matthew chapter 11, verse 19, verso 19. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 19. Jesus, the gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax gatherers and sinners. You want to be a good friend? Make yourself available. Because where was Jesus found? With the people that he was accused of being friends with. You want to be a good friend, make yourself available. Because as we read just a few moments ago, is it always convenient to be a friend? Is it always convenient to be a friend? The answer is no. But why do we make those sacrifices? Because we care, because we love them, because we know they would do the same for us, because we want them to do the same for us, because of compassion, because of mercy, because of grace, because of godliness. I mean, take your pick from the list there. But a hallmark of a good friend is somebody who makes himself or herself available. Here was Jesus. He was spending time with the people. Look at Luke chapter 11. Lucas, capítulo 11. Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11. This is where I get to preach to myself and you just get to sit back and listen. But I'm going to reckon that this applies to you as well as you hear me talk to myself. Oh, how I hate picking up the phone. Mitch, if it could be a text message, what should it be? Short. And it should be a text message. Don't call. But Jimmy and I had a situation earlier this week. And I called Jimmy. And Jimmy's exact thought process as he expressed it to me was this. If Tyler's not texting, there's an immediate need. And what did my friend Jimmy do? He picked up the phone. He scared me. It rang 4 times, but he picked up the phone. What does a good friend do? They pick up the phone. Right? I get it. You may not like to text. You may not like to talk. You may not like to write a letter. So it doesn't have to be the phone. It can be pick up the pen. It can be T9 text. It can, whatever you want to do. It's when the call, the metaphorical call comes in. What does a friend do? They answer. Why? Because they're a friend. Again, let's work off of that proverb. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. If I want friends, I need to be friendly myself. Here's what a friend does. A friend picks up the phone. When someone calls, I answer. Again, here in Luke chapter 11 and in verse 5. Suppose one of you shall have a friend and shall go to him at midnight and say, Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has come from a journey and I have nothing to set before him. I don't start questioning motives. I don't start saying, hey, why didn't you do this for me? You need it. I'm your friend. Here you go. We're not talking about abusing the system here and going to them every night and, depleting their precious supply of Mrs. Baird's bread or anything like that. What we are talking about is there are moments. There are moments in your life when someone is going to reach out to you. I remember one that sticks out in my mind so well is I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from a friend. He said, I've got a gun and I'm about to do something really stupid. And I need you. I went and picked up my friend and we sat in a parking lot of a Wendy's until 4 o'clock in the morning. And for a lot of times I just sat there and listened. And I heard some things that were really uncomfortable and really unpleasant. But my friend needed me. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I wanted to be in bed. Audrey, was Bree born yet when that happened? I don't think she was, so you were very great with child, let us say. So comfortable sleep was hard to come by. For her, for me to a much, much, much lesser extent. I regret I even said that. Just strike that from the record and let's move on, right? I didn't say that, what? The point being, there are moments, and they are not often, but there are moments when our friends call and they need us. And what a terrible thing to not pick up the phone. Friends, pick up the phone. A few pages over. Capítulo 14, verso 12, chapter 14 and verse 12. Lest we come away with some sort of skewed conclusion here. Friendship is not and cannot be a one-way street. True friendship cannot be a one-way street. If all it is one party in the friendship giving and giving and giving and giving and giving, it's not a friendship. It's not healthy, and it's not beneficial. And that can be difficult. That can be a difficult conclusion to arrive at times. Because it means so oftentimes that what is comfortable for whatever reason, what is comfortable, what we are accustomed to, what we've experienced time and time and time and time and time again, what's comfortable is not healthy and is not good and is not beneficial. And if that's the experience that I have over and over and over and over again, what that tells me is I probably need to seriously consider leaving that friendship. I understand sometimes you're married to the person and that can't happen. I'm not talking about marriage here. Let's make that very clear. I'm just talking about simple friendship. But if it's not a two-way street, and for some reason, if you need to get mad at me afterwards, you can get mad at me. But a lot of times we see this in relationships with our young people and especially our young ladies with boyfriends. If it is a one-way street in that relationship, you don't have any business marrying that guy. Your friendship needs to be a two-way street. It's one of the points you get here from Luke chapter 14 and verse 12. Throwing the dinner, inviting your friends, because what do friends do? They invite you back. Friendship's a two-way street. Let's end here, Luke chapter 5. Last point. Luke chapter 5. Lucas capítulo 5. Versos 17 a 20. Luke chapter 5, beginning in verse 17. I love this story. It came about one day that he was teaching, and there were some Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting there who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present for him to perform healing. I have always wondered if, Brother Roach, you'll have to indulge me per one of our conversations in the past, I've always wondered if when we get to heaven, if God will show us what some of these moments in Scripture were like, like a divine television almost, and going back and seeing what some of these moments were like. Imagine what this moment must have been like. The crowd is all around this house. Somebody wants to get into Jesus to be healed. Verse 18, behold, some men were carrying on a bed a man who was paralyzed, and they were trying to bring him in and to set him down in front of him, and not finding any way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down through the tiles in a stretcher. That doesn't even begin to express what they did. They climbed up on this dude's house, they went to the mud and plaster roof, and they tore the roof up with their hands. They didn't just happen to find a person-sized vent in the roof and just let him down and, oh gracious, here he comes down from the ceiling. Well, how are you? There would have been debris and dust and dirt and all sorts of allergens just raining over the crowd. And oh my goodness, look, they are letting him down with, looks like bed sheets coming down out of the sky. And what happened? He was right in the center, right in front of Jesus. Verse 20, and seeing their faith. Seeing their faith. Jesus said, friend, your sins are forgiven you. You want to be a good friend? Find some people to go tear up roofs with. Not property damage. Go find the people who are going to bring you to Jesus. Go find the people who, look there again at verse 19. Go find the people who are going to bring you right in the center, right in front of Jesus, and you go spend your time with them. Make that person your friend. Choose that person. Choose the person who, when you can't move for yourself, they will pick you up, tear up the roof, and bring you to Jesus. Choose the friends who Jesus will look at and see their faith and say, you know what? You made the right choice. Choose the people that are going to help you get closer to Jesus. It's a whole lot easier to be pulled down off a table than it is to pull someone up there with you. Surround yourself by people who will encourage you and lift you up, not by the ones who, well-meaning or not, will tear you down. Look to Jesus for friendship. Look to Him for His teaching on friendship. Make friends with the people that are going to help you draw close to Jesus and glorify Him. If you look at your life this evening and you're outside of a relationship with Jesus, if you haven't been living as you should, if He's not your friend, won't you come to Him? Won't you come to Him and join with Him? Become His brother, become His child. Put Him on in baptism, raised to walk a new life. If you look at your life and you haven't been following Jesus and you need to make some changes, we're ready and willing to help you make those changes. We want to encourage you in any way that we can if you'd simply let us know by coming while we stand and while we sing.